Pittsburgh Steelers fans, we are back and better than ever. Well, better than 5 minutes ago, maybe. As my name is Bryan Anthony Davis with Behind the Steel Curtain. Tony Defeo joins me once again. You love this, don't you, Tony?
I love it. Yes. This is fun stuff.
The Steeler Retro Show is something that we're built for because we're Generation Xers, I guess you can call us. And I remember when Generation X was supposed to be cool, and now it's now it just means we're kind of old. But as far as that goes, we're closer to 50 than we are 40. But we love our Pittsburgh Steelers, and we grew up in the late 70s, the early 80s, and we remember a lot of these guys throughout the years that, and some of them we forgot about. I don't, because I have that crazy, I just have this lust for the Steelers as far as, and a lust for yesterday. So it's really fun to look at these guys. But, the Pittsburgh Steelers have had a great history, Tony, as far as especially the last 50 years and what I call the modern era. I actually call it 1969 when Chuck Noll and Joe Green came on the scene. And that's when the dynasty started. They started sowing the seeds of the dynasty. So with that, we've had players that have made the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We've had a bunch of them. We've had guys that were perennial All-Pros, perennial Pro Bowlers, and some that just never got on that plane to Hawaii. Mm-hmm. Never got to take their wife and kids to a luau or a girlfriend. So, and now it's not in Hawaii now as much. Here and there, they're going to go ahead and do it. But now, it's in Orlando or it's in Atlanta, it's in Miami. Sometimes they're going to go back to Hawaii too. But that was a great benefit. And there's a lot of people that are thinking that, there's no reason to even play the Pro Bowl anymore. I'm kind of one of them, but it's an honor. And these players still strive to make it. But with all of that, Tony, there's some great players in Pittsburgh Steeler history that have never made a Pro Bowl.
Right.
And we saw it last week when we talked about the offensive team. If you remember that, we've named guys like Bubby Brister, Rocky Blyer, Frank Pollard, Frenchie Fuqua, Randy Grossman, Plexico Burris, Ernie Mills, Antoine Randall L., Santonio Holmes, John Kolb, John Jackson, Max Starks, Sam Davis, Ramon Foster, and Craig Wolfley. We named those guys. We also named Josh Miller, if I'm not mistaken, as a punter. And as a kicker, I believe it was Sean Sweezum that we brought out.
No, it was Jeff Reed.
Jeff Reed. Yeah, excuse me. Reed. It was Jeff Reed. So I appreciate you mentioning that. So Ryan O'Toole says, don't forget to hit like. I thought he said something else, which is actually going to preview one of the players we're going to talk about, but I don't want to give that away. So what we're going to have you do, we're going to start with defensive end. So instead of throwing in your guesses, wait till we go ahead and read them off. And if I've missed any of them, let us know, but then we're going to ask you to vote as we go. So we'll probably do that. And we're going to try to name a starting team and maybe a backup. So for each position. Now, when we get to linebacker and defensive tackle, we're gonna do a little extra because you have middle linebackers, you have different schemes. So that team used to be a 4-3, the great Steel Curtain. You had four guys in the front four. Then you had the linebackers that were three, and in 1982, that's switched. Matty Peverall says, "Bad, please don't start with Jarvis Jones." Jarvis Jones was actually on the pre-list, but I didn't even send Jarvis Jones to Tony. I just didn't even want to do that. He wasn't really deserving to make the list. There might be a couple that didn't deserve to make the list, but I am a rather thorough guy. Jarvis is not on it. You're going to see some names on here that are going to be a little crazy, that don't deserve to be on there, but they're just guys that did not make the Pro Bowl. Big Marv says, "What's goody? We back. Love it." That's I might steal that. Next week, I might just come on and say, "What's goody? We back." Is that okay, Big Marv? Because I love that. That's "What's goody's" awesome. I might do that in my regular life. So here we go. Let's start with defensive ends. And as far as defensive ends go, we just talked about Bud Dupree in the last show filing a grievance with his position for getting paid and because of the franchise tag. So, I consider Cam Hayward a defensive end. He's listed in some circles as a defensive tackle. But and I'm going to have a guy on this list on the team that he might be listed as a defensive tackle, but he's probably, to me, he's a defensive end in the 3-4. So, there might be some disparity from where they played. Some of them played inside and outside, but if they're listed as a defensive end, we're probably going to keep them there. So we'll start off with defensive ends. We're going to start off with 2 starters, and we're going to throw in 1 reserve. Okay? So I'm going to throw in some names that I believe are honorable mention. So I will throw out Ziggy Hood, number 1 pick from 2009 to 2013. Kevin Henry from 1993 to 2000. Defensive end who was also notable because of a cousin. Do you know who that cousin is, Tony?
I do not.
You're a WWE guy. You're a wrestling guy. World's strongest man.
He's Mark Henry's cousin.
He is Mark Henry's cousin.
Wow, I had no idea.
WWE cool. Hall of Famer. And so Kevin Henry, and it's spelled, it looks like it's Kevin because it's spelled Kevin, but it is Kevin. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure he's had that messed up like crazy. My stepson is named Stefan, but everybody that reads it thinks his name is Steven. And so I told my wife, I'm like, I think you really messed up on the spelling here, and she yells at me for that. So here's a guy on the list too. And so these honorable mention guys, I'm going to go ahead and throw out there, and we'll discuss some of the guys that I consider finalists. Brenton Buckner, 1994 to 1996, a number 2 draft pick, went on to play a lot for the Carolina Panthers. He was a defensive end here in Pittsburgh. He played a lot of defensive tackle more in Carolina. He never went to a Pro Bowl. And I actually thought he would have with Carolina, and he did not. Then you also have Donald Evans on the list, 1990 to 1993, a big free agent pickup from the Los Angeles Rams. Tim Johnson had a great career with the Washington franchise. He played from 1987 to 1989 out of Penn State. You have Edmund Nelson, who went from 1982 to 1987. And I'm going to throw in Tom Beasley, defensive end from 1978 to 1983. Now, are there any of those guys on the list that you feel should be a finalist? Because I'm putting them in as honorable mention, Tony.
No, I was thinking about that. No, I think a lot of those guys are, they had great, they were great contributors, like Kevin Henry with the great read on that very important game in '97 against the Patriots in New England, where
that game.
Yeah, where he read the quick running back screen that they kept running on the Steelers. He diagnosed it, picked it off, and that led to a comeback and overtime victory. So I like him, but no, I think all these guys are great on the honorable mention list.
So that's also a guy, Tony, that we are going to end up. Excuse me, that's a game that we're going to end up talking about in the future in the retro show as we look back on some great moments in Steeler history. And we're going to cover that for an entire show. One of my favorite games, that December 1997 game, and which was actually a very bittersweet day for me because I started out with that game and I was all excited because I had a date that night. And it was going to be a fantastic day. That game had me all pumped. I was feeling awesome. I was actually a little bit late for the date. It didn't really ruin the date because I ended up okay. In fact, I ended up marrying the woman, but ended up being my ex-wife with that first date. And so, so it's bittersweet. So when I look back, and I believe it was December 13th, if I'm not mistaken, of 1997. And when I look back on that absolute date, I'm thinking that the Patriots game was more important, more than anything. That was just an awesome game. What a great comeback. I've watched that in the last 2 years, and I'm going to go ahead and watch that again so we could talk about it more. But let's talk about these defensive ends. It's got to start out with the bunch. He was a Cleveland Browns fan. His dad was actually mad that he signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers as a free agent. John Banaszak, 1976 to 1981.
Oh, he definitely deserves to be up there because, I mean, he was so valuable for them in the late 70s, especially that 79 season when they had so many injuries as they were going for their fourth Super Bowl. He was very, very valuable. And as you mentioned, he played on their 3 Super Bowl teams. And it wasn't easy to break into the steel curtain in those days. And he managed to do it.
I love John Banaszak. He was my first number when I played football when I was 11. I was number 76, and I was all proud that I was wearing Banaszak's number. And, everybody wanted the numbers of everybody wanted like 75, and they wanted 12, and they wanted 32. They gave me 76. I'm like, all right, I'm good with that. I'm really good with that. Here's one, and he could have been on the honorable mention list, but I thought he had a pretty decent career with the Steelers, and a lot of people don't realize it. He was a number 1 pick in 1982. He held out that entire year. In fact, ended up playing for the Montreal Alouettes in the CFL, and then made his debut with Pittsburgh in 1983. From 1982 to 1988, though, Keith Gary.
Yeah, he's as you said, he was a first-round pick out of Oklahoma, I want to say, or Nebraska.
Oklahoma
in 1981, and he went to Canada for 2 years, and he came here. He had a really good first year in '83. He kind of tailed off after that, but he had a pretty decent career here. He was a starter for a number of years, 25 sacks. So yeah, he definitely deserves to be in contention for the starter.
Here's a guy that was only here for 2 years. Here's a guy who had 5.5 sacks in Tampa Bay before he came here in 5 seasons. In 2 seasons in Pittsburgh, he had 5.5 sacks. And he was pretty, actually, let me rephrase it. I think it was 11 sacks in Tampa and 11 in Pittsburgh, if I'm not mistaken. Only here for 2 years, did not go to a college. In fact, he played semi-pro ball in Syracuse. Big play Ray Seals, number 97.
I always have fun memories of him in that era because that was a time when the Steelers became relevant again in the mid-'90s. He was one of their first free agent signings, a notable free agent signings anyway. And he was a starter in Super Bowl 30.
1994 and 1995. Now, some people have bad memories of big play Ray Seals because he was the guy, and it was a business opportunity. I really don't have a problem with him for doing this, but some people will always bring this up. He was the guy who came up with the Steelers doing a video called 60-Minute Men. And they did it right before the AFC Championship game. It was supposed to be their answer 10 years later to the Super Bowl Shuffle. And It was the video with the Steelers. And I've never seen it. I don't think it ever really was released.
No.
So the 60-Minute Men.
Yeah.
And they only went 59 minutes.
That's right. Yeah. I didn't realize he was the brainchild behind that. But I can live with I can live with that. I don't think that had much to do with anything, but obviously, if you do something like that and then you don't win the game, then people are gonna find fault with you. But that's no biggie. He made up for it the next year.
And then jerkholes like me come out and remind people of 60-Minute Men. Ex-Coda, Steelers had some relevance in the 1980s. They really did have some relevance.
Well, I mean,
AFC Championship game in 1984. A great run in 1989.
Wow.
About 3 or 4 AFC Central championships. I'm not sure, maybe 3.
Well, I meant after they struggled pretty bad from like 85 through through the time Chuck Noll retired. And when I say relevance, I mean back to the Super Bowl, AFC Championship games on a yearly basis. The 80s were great, and that's why I love this show, because one of the names you're going to mention very soon is somebody that I just think should be celebrated more than he has been in Steeler lore.
Tony, Darren Dalton says it. The retro show, I feel like I'm not old enough to be here, LOL. We will get to your guys. In fact, we're going to get to one of your guys next. Reed Overend says 60-Minute Man is on YouTube. Watched it a few times. I gotta go watch it. I gotta see that. As soon as this is over,
yeah,
I'm going to do that. I love it. That's amazing. I can't believe it. I've never had a chance to see it. Oh, by the way, it is pronounced, and I appreciate that because we can't always do that. It's pronounced Excode. Okay, Excode. We will definitely pronounce it right. And hey, I appreciate you disagreeing with us as well, because I have no problem with anybody disagreeing with us, because I can't speak for Tony, but I'm wrong a lot. So don't worry about that. So one more defensive end here. And like I said, with the disclaimer at the beginning, you might be able to call him a defensive tackle. I don't. He plays on the end for me. 2014 to present, Stephon Tuitt.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think his story still has yet to be written, but yeah, he's definitely. I mean, he could go on to have a career that's littered with Pro Bowls, but as of right now, it's quite obvious that the talent that's there, and it's just a matter of him staying healthy. But he definitely deserves to be on this list.
All right, let's 2 starters and a reserve.
Well, I mean, I think we skipped over one, the guy that I really, really love, and that's the career of Keith Willis, 1982.
Oh my gosh, we did, because that's my number one. And
yeah,
we
me too.
Yeah. I had him next to Keith Gary, because Gary and Keith Willis were drafted in the same year.
And 59 sacks. I mean, obviously the sack didn't become an official stat until 1982. But I mean, when he left here, he was number one all time. I mean, I guess again it's misleading, but 59 sacks is that's a pretty darn good career for an undrafted free agent out of Northeastern, and he's why I love things like this, because guys, when I say relevance, like I've mentioned before, how the Steelers became relevant in the 90s. Well, the 70s were a very hard act to follow, as we all know, 4 Super Bowls, and to come along in the 80s, and yeah, they made the playoffs a few times, but they had a lot of lean years. They didn't have a whole lot of stars, and guys like Keith Willis, they get overlooked because it's almost better to have been a major contributor for the Steelers before the 1970s than after the Super Bowl started, because now every player is defined. Did he win a Super Bowl or didn't he? And if they didn't, then we kind of forget about them. So Keith Willis is definitely my number one starter on the defensive line as a defensive end.
Fifth all time in Steelers sacks. And I'm going to tell you this. On the official list, he's third all time because, on the official list, L.C. Greenwood and Joe Green aren't on there. Mm-hmm. But as far as Keith Willis goes, I can't believe I passed over him because he's number one on my list. He's my number one guy. And I've already penciled him in. He has a starting position on this team. Keith Willis, I'm gonna do my bold statement right here. Keith Willis would have been almost a Hall of Famer if he played today. He would be a perennial All-Pro. He never made a Pro Bowl. He was that good.
14 and 12 sacks in 2 different years. That's pretty remarkable in the 80s for a guy. And I think his 14 sack year was in 83 during a playoff run. And that was when he first became a starter. So yeah, he was just a victim of the time that he played in as far as recognition.
So we've got 4 other guys vying for a starting spot and a reserve spot. Will it be Keith Willis, John Banaszak, Ray Seals, or Stephon Tuitt? And I know he wasn't here long, but I am thinking that I'm going to narrow this down to Ray Seals and John Banaszak.
I'd have to. My vote goes to Banaszak because he played on 3 Super Bowl teams, and again he managed to win a starting job in the late '70s, which wasn't easy to do, to beat out somebody in the steel curtain.
Live chat, are we cool with that? Are we cool with these guys? Keith Willis and John Banaszak, and let's go ahead and look for our reserve. What do you think? Let's say no to Keith Gary. And we would be looking at Stephon Tuitt and Ray Seals for the reserve. So live chat, first 5, winner gets it. Is it going to be Tuitt or is it going to be Ray Seals? So we're saying good to Willis and Banaszak, and let's get our reserve in there. Tony, who are you picking of these two, Tuitt or Seals?
Just for again, because he came along at a time when I think he really helped bring the Steelers back to the top of the mountain, almost anyway. I'm going to go with Ray Seals because Stephon, his story is not totally complete yet. He might be a Hall of Famer when all is said and done. So I'm going to go with Ray Seals.
Okay, best out of 5 gets it. It's Ray Seals as the reserve. Keith Willis and John Banaszak are our starters. Let's look now. We're going to do this here for defensive tackles. We're going to go ahead and take 2 defensive tackles. We're going to go ahead and take 1 nose tackle. Or we can take 2 nose tackles because there's a reserve. Since we're looking at the modern era, we're going nose tackles. So here we go. And here it's a pretty good list. It's a smaller list. But number 1 right off the bat is probably a guy that I'm definitely voting for. He was in the famed steel curtain, defensive tackle. He had about 40 career sacks in 1974 and 1975. He even led the league one of those years in sacks. He had 15 and a half. Arrowhead, Ernie Holmes. He was crazy. He was absolutely crazy. But he's got to be on this list. Arrowhead, what do you think?
I have a confession. I didn't even look him up because I assumed he was in a Pro Bowl. That's how highly everybody thought of that guy. He was on par with Joe Green in the early years. I had to double check on Dwight White, the great Dwight White, and make sure he made the Pro Bowl a couple of times. But Ernie Holmes, I just assumed he was in the Pro Bowl. That's how dominant he was in the early to mid '70s. So he's definitely number 1 on my list.
Yeah, you know what? I was shocked too. I did not think that. I would have thought that he made it, but you got to think you had all those other guys on the defensive line making it. Mm-hmm. And not only that, you had the Purple People Eaters in Minnesota. You had the Doomsday Defense.
Yeah.
And even though they were, now granted, they were NFC teams. Also the Doomsday Defense, Los Angeles, not Los Angeles. The Doomsday was Dallas. Los Angeles was, I forgot the nickname.
Fearsome Foursome.
Fearsome Foursome, yeah. And so
that's my favorite.
But you had some great pass rushers and great defensive linemen in the AFC as well. So, I got to say that's probably the reason Ernie Holmes didn't make it, because all those other guys on the Steelers defensive line were making it. Let's go to Steve Furness, another defensive tackle who was also, he succeeded Ernie Holmes when Ernie Holmes left in 1976. After the 1976 season, Steve Furness became a starter on that defensive line. Banaszak did too. Mm-hmm. He eventually made it there, but Steve Furness pretty much took over Holmes's spot. Furness had 30-some sacks in Pittsburgh, was a pretty good player. Number 64. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the late Steve Furness?
I liked his story. He like Banaszak. He had it wasn't easy following a legend like Ernie Holmes and trying to fit in with guys like Joe Green and Elsie Greenwood on that defensive line and not just fit in, but you had to produce, and he did. I mean, I remember when Super Bowl 13, he sacked Roger Staubach, and he was so intense about it that Joe Green, of all people, it was like, you need to calm down. You could see him on the field telling him to calm down. So. Yeah, I love his story. He's definitely a contender as far as a starter.
Here's a guy that people don't know a lot about and was really good. Gerald Williams from 1986 to 1994.
Right. Yeah, I forgot about him, but he was he was one of those players that he was a consistent starter, and he assumed the starting role right around the time where the Steelers of the '70s were kind of all vanished away, and it was just a whole new team, and he had to be one of the leaders on that defense, and he stuck around for quite a while.
And he was also, here's a guy that was also a transitional player. He played in the 80s, but he also played on those early Bill Cowher teams, and he was pretty special. A lot of people don't realize in 9 seasons in Pittsburgh, he had 24 and a half sacks.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Now, of course, that's 9 seasons, and the average is about, a little less than 3 a year, but he was also playing nose tackle as well. So you can actually put him in the nose tackle category if you wish. Gary Dunn is a guy that I absolutely love. He could be a defensive tackle or a nose tackle because he crossed over. He was there in 1976 to 1987. They switched from a 4-3 to a 3-4 in 1982. So he became a nose tackle in 1982. I would be more likely to put him on the nose tackle list. But Gary Dunn was a phenomenal player for the Steelers. You just don't remember him.
Right. Yeah, he was a standout for them in the mid '80s when they didn't have very many stars. I mean, he produced on that defense. He had 18 sacks in his career, so he's definitely he's like Keith Willis. He's one of those guys that he just basically. I mean, he was around for a couple Super Bowls, but his main years as a starter occurred when the Steelers were in transition of the '80s. So I always have respect for guys like that.
So let's look at one more before I get into the honorable mention here that I did not mention, but the honorable mention is going to have a shot at nose tackle as well. But here's a guy that you more modern era guys will love. And when I say modern, since 2000, a little more, Kimo von Oelhoffen.
Yeah.
People don't understand how good Kimo von Oelhoffen was. They remember him for and I'm going to put quotes. And if you're listening to this on iTunes or any streaming channel, I have air quotes up. People just remember him for the dirty hit on Carson Palmer, which was anything but. It was not a dirty hit whatsoever.
Right.
But Kimo von Oelhoffen was so key in that Super Bowl year for the Steelers. They don't win a Super Bowl without Kimo Oelhoffen. And he, from 2000 to 2005 for 6 seasons, he was money on that defensive line when you had guys at linebacker that were just killing it from every angle. He's one of those guys in the trenches making stuff happen.
Yeah, he in those days, a 3-4 zone blitz defense, the defensive ends and nose tackles, they had to occupy multiple blockers to free up the linebackers, and it wasn't a glorious position. But I mean, he was a leader on that defense. You see some highlights from the Denver AFC Championship game where he's yelling at the guys on the sideline when it kind of got tight late in the game to settle down. So I mean, there's a guy that he could get those guys to respect him, even though he was mostly mild mannered. I have a lot of fond memories of Kimo.
Yeah, so that's definitely a guy that we got to look at on this list. Since for the essence of time, we're going to go ahead and throw some more names out there. Defensive tackle or a nose tackle could be Travis Kershke from 2000 to 2009. Didn't realize he was there that long. Steve McLendon from 2010 to 2015. He wore number 69 and 90 for the Steelers. Javon Hargrave, more recent years, last 4 years, 2016 to 2019. And another nose tackle to talk about, Chris Hoke was here for an awful long time and a really good player. I am going to break this down. Let's go ahead and talk about the nose tackles first. And I'm going to break it down into Gary Dunn, Gerald Williams, Travis Kershke, Steve McLendon, Javon Hargrave, and Chris Hoke. None of those made the Pro Bowl, but let's give 2 of those guys the nose tackle position. Then we'll circle back to defensive tackle.
Well, I'm gonna go with for my starter would have to be Gary Dunn because he was here for so long, and I like guys like that played during non-Super Bowl years didn't really get the glory, but they may have gotten it had they played in a different era. So he's my number one.
What about your backup, though?
My backup? I have to go with Chris Hoke because he was invaluable for them when Big Hampton went down a couple of times, especially that 2004 season when Hampton went down with an ACL midway through the year, and Chris Hoke came in, and that defense never missed a beat.
What about Javon Hargrave or Steve McClendon? Can we give any love to those guys?
Oh, absolutely. McClendon, he had the unenviable task of becoming their starter after Hampton retired, and he was a borderline Hall of Famer, certainly one of the best nose tackles of his era. So to follow him, it wasn't easy. As far as Javon Hargrave, I think he's like Stephon Tuitt. I put him in that category. It's just a matter of time before he starts making Pro Bowls and he becomes one of the best players at this position in the league. So he's not a Pro Bowler right now, but I think it's just a matter of time before he becomes one.
Okay, so let's go ahead and put Steve McClendon, and we'll go ahead and put Chris Hoke. Best out of 5, live chat. First 5 in. The first one gets to 3 is going to win it. So as far as nose tackles go, who are we going to get here? It's going to be Hoke, or is it? And you've already voted for Hoke. I'm voting for McClendon, but I want to hear from the live chat. So what do we've got? We've got 1 for Hoke. We've got 2 for Hoke. We get 1 more, and it looks like it's going to be Hoke. And, since I'm the only one that said Dean McCrae says it's Hoke. So there you go. I really like what McClendon did, but I love what Hoke did here too. So as well. So I don't have a problem. Dave Shipley finally, and Excode said McClendon, but Hoke is the winner here. Let's circle back to our defensive tackles. We're going to go ahead and take 2, and we're going to take a reserve. Ernie Holmes is there. I'm not he's already penciled in. So the other guys that we're looking at here, we've got Steve Furness, we've got Kimo von Oelhoffen, and we've got Gerald Williams as well. So that's probably pretty easy. It looks like based on stats and everything, I don't even think we really need to put this to a vote. But we're going to go ahead and put a vote between Steve Furness and Kimo von Oelhoffen for our starter. I've already got 2 for Kimo as our starter. And I don't think it's going to be long until we get a third, but is anybody going to vote for Furness? White Dave Shipley did make a Pro Bowl. So it looks like we're going to, Donald Nolan, thank you. Kimo von Oelhoffen is going to be our starter. And then Steve Furness will be our reserve there. So very good. Man, am I slow with this. I'm sorry about this. So we're going to go to outside linebacker. And I'm going to go ahead and try to remember to give you my honorable mention first. So we'll start with Dennis Dirt Winston, who was here for 2 tours, 1977 to 81. He tore it up for the Saints in the mid-'80s. In fact, had an interception return against the Steelers on Monday Night Football to break their back. Mm-hmm. The 1985 to 1986, he came back for a little bit, wore a different number. He was 53, then came back as 55. Carlos Emmons from 96 to 99. Jarrell Williams, 1987 to 1992. That's a guy that signed a big free agent contract with the Chargers. I would have liked to have seen him stay. He was a really good player. Mm-hmm. But as you saw in 1993, you had the likes of Greg Lloyd and Kevin Green together. So they really didn't have to pay the money to Gerald Williams, but a really good player. Jason Worlds, not exactly my favorite player, but he had some good years here, 2010 to 2015. Get on the Moats, Arthur Moats, 2014 to 2017. So those are our honorable mention. So here are the guys we're going to look at for outside linebacker to never make a Pro Bowl for the Steelers. Ezra Nehemiah says Clark Haggans already comes to mind. Clark Haggans, 2000 to 2007. He's in the top 11 all time for Steelers in sacks. What do you think about Clark Haggans, Tony? Because he's on the list.
I love Clark Haggans. He was a quiet member of that linebacking quartet that went to Super Bowl 40, and you mentioned he had his position on the sack list. He had 32 or 32 and a half. So he gets my vote as the starter.
He definitely gets my vote too. Let's look at a guy that I'm a huge fan of here. His name is Bryan Hinkle. Bryan Hinkle was one of those mad men of the 80s that really made things happen as an outside linebacker. Had a lot of sacks here in Pittsburgh too. He was a perfect Steeler because he was very blue collar. He was a blue collar player for the Steelers. Bryan Hinkle, what are your thoughts on him making this list?
Yeah, he's like Keith Willis. He had, he came along after the Super Bowl glory days, and he played 11 years here, 116 starts, 15 interceptions. He's a strong contender for me as far as the as far as the starter.
Snowman says David Little. David Little made a Pro Bowl. He made one of them.
Yep. And he was inside linebacker.
And you would have thought, and that's a guy that you're like, wow, you weren't sure, but there's some guys, and Robin Cole's another one. Robin Cole's not on the list because he made a Pro Bowl in 1984. I thought Robin Cole would be one of the guys that would be a sure starter. So of these guys, there's one more that I haven't mentioned yet, and I'm going to. But of Dennis Sturt Winston, Jarrell Williams, Carlos Emmons, Jason Worlds, Arthur Moats, would any of them replace the guy that I think should be the reserve here in Alvin Bud Dupree?
Well, Dirt started at Super Bowl 14 in place of an injured Jack Ham, so that's a point in his favor. But he didn't really. I'm going to go with Jason Worlds because I think he could have had a much better career had he not retired early.
Jason Worlds probably had better sacks than Dennis Sturt Winston. So live chat, I'm going to ask you to. We've already established Haggans and Bryan Hinkle as our starters here. It seems that a lot of people in the live chat love those two picks. And of the players, let's look at Bud Dupree against Jason Worlds for that reserve spot. And we've got a vote for Moats. We've got a vote for Winston. We've got another vote for Moats. All right. So throw them in. First one to get to 3 is going to get it. We've got 2 for Worlds, 2 for Moats, 2 for Worlds, none for Dupree. Let's see who's going to break it up here. Exco Day, tiebreaker. Wow, this guy came out of nowhere for me. Arthur Moats. This is more of the reason for Arthur Moats to come on the show now.
Yeah, he's a great personality. I think that helped too. He's a great guy. Unbelievably great guy.
So a lot of people are feeling the way that you do, Tony, as far as when you said that you feel that Hargrave is going to get his one and maybe more. A lot of people think Bud's going to get his.
Yeah.
So that's a guy to look at. So our outside linebackers, Clark Haggans, Bryan Hinkle, and reserve Arthur Moats. And Moats is great because he could have been an inside linebacker as well. So because of that, we're going to take him. I had him on my inside linebacker list, but since he made the cut, I'm going to take him off. Now, this list, this is a pretty short list for inside linebacker. So we're really not going to vote on these guys. And the reason we're not going to vote on these guys is I've got 5 guys on the list. I've got 2 spots for middle linebacker. I've got 3 spots for outside linebacker. And I think they all make this list. So I'm going to put them all on. 1 in the essence of time. And 5, we've got spots for everybody. Let's do middle linebacker. But what we are going to do, we're going to vote on the starter, though. For middle linebacker, guys that played mostly in the 70s and 80s before 82 would be Henry Davis. Not a lot of people know, but this guy had like a lot of sacks before Jack Lambert got here. He was a middle linebacker. He 1970 to 1970, if I'm not mistaken, 21 sacks in the time from what I was looking. No, I'm sorry, 17 sacks as I look at my list here. Henry Davis in 4 years had 17 sacks. He was pretty tough in the middle. And you had Lauren Tays, who was here for 11 seasons.
Yeah.
And Lauren Tays had a spot start a lot. Of course, Jack Lambert was there. He played inside and out, but he was more of an inside linebacker.
Mm-hmm.
So as a middle linebacker, so let's pick a starter. And this is just middle linebacker. We're going to get to the inside linebackers in a moment. But Henry Davis and Lauren Tays, who's going to be your starter?
I'm going to go with Lauren Tays because he was here all throughout the Super Bowl years, and he played. He contributed to those teams. So,
all right, I am going to say the same thing. Lauren Tays. I'm not sure. I don't know as much about Henry Davis. It's just what I've read.
Right.
But I'm going to go ahead and say that he's the starter. Now we've got 3 guys that we can talk about for inside linebacker. One guy replaced the other, and the other guy replaced the other. So the 3 guys on this list were replaced by the guy behind him. So first we have, somebody mentioned him at the beginning. They called him the Hitman. When he was drafted in the 5th round in 1996, Bill Cowher calls him up and says, "Hey, welcome to the Steelers." He said, "Coach Cowher, I'd like to congratulate you because you just selected the best linebacker in the draft." His name was Earl Holmes. Your rememberings of Earl Holmes, Tony.
He was like all 3 of these guys had kind of like the same trait. They were really good at stopping the run, not so great in pass coverage, but they were tackling machines. He had 546 tackles when he was here. He was a starter for those late 90s teams through 01. So, I liked Earl Holmes. I saw him at South Hills Village back in like 1998. I passed him right up. I couldn't believe it was him. So, yeah, Earl Holmes, a tackling machine.
Yeah, he was absolutely tough. I loved that guy. He was my favorite. I thought he would make a Pro Bowl. I thought when he left here, he went to the Browns. And he says he wished he never went. He wished he would have never left because the culture just wasn't the same. And a lot of players leave the Steelers and are like, "Man, I didn't realize how great the culture was there." Jason Medley says Holmes was dependable, and that's exactly what he was. I would have loved to have seen him stay. The guy who replaced him was pretty special too, because when Holmes left via free agency, they brought in a former 8th round overall pick from the New York Jets from Virginia. You know him as Potsy. Everyone else knows him as James Ferrier. Ferrier is the next guy on that list.
Yeah. Well, he went to the Pro Bowl, didn't he? I thought James Ferrier went to the Pro Bowl.
Yeah, James Ferrier did go to the Pro Bowl, and I just completely messed that up. I just talked about a guy that's not even on my list. He did go to the Pro Bowl.
I love James Ferrier. I don't blame you for that.
Yeah, so I can see you looking at the list, and I just screwed up here. But the guy who replaced basically Holmes also when he came in was Larry Foote.
4th round out of Michigan, 2002.
Yeah, so he came in and he was playing around the time of Ferrier. He played alongside Ferrier from 2002 to 2008, and again in 2010 and 2013. Larry Foote was another guy who wished he would have never left. He did go home to Detroit for a little bit, then came back. Great career here. Larry Foote's on that list. And the guy who replaced Larry Foote when he left in 2013 was a guy that's still there.
My man, Vince Williams.
Vinny Vidi Vici. Vince Williams. So what we need to do here is we need to go ahead and take Earl Holmes, Larry Foote, and Vince Williams. We got to pick 2 starters and 1 reserve. And I'm right away thinking Earl Holmes is the starter. But live chat, go ahead and pick the starters for me. Tony, I'll let you go ahead too.
Well, I'm going to go with Larry Foote as one of my starters. He was on 3 Super Bowl teams, and he actually somehow, some way managed to become one of the leaders of that defense, which wasn't easy at that time when you had Peasy and Ferrier and Hampton and all those Troy, and he became a voice in that locker room, and he became a starter. So I'm going with Larry Foote, and I'm actually going to go with Vince Williams as my second starter, only because unlike Javon and Stefan Tuitt, I think we know what kind of player Vince Williams is. He's a heart and soul kind of guy. He's a 1-2 kind of guy, but he's never going to be a superstar. So, and he's made a nice career for himself. Former 6th-round pick out of Florida State in 2013. I love Vince Williams, so he's going to be my other starter.
So, gosh, it looks like, if I'm not mistaken, Vince Williams almost pulled it out, but Foote beat him to it. So Foote's number 1. Holmes just beat out Vinny. Just beat him out. I mean, it was close. It was really close. It's Foote and Holmes. But Vinny made it. Vinny is definitely there as a reserve.
Absolutely.
But Foote and Holmes are our guys. Now, only 15 minutes left in the show, and we've got to do the defensive backs. So I'm going to go ahead and read this list because we've got a bunch of, and this guy's not supposed to be on the list. Let me cross him off. He's a safety. We have a lot of cornerbacks. So we're going to take 3 here. So I'm going to read the honorable mentions first. And here we go. John Rouser, 1970 and 1973. Had a nice little career for him in Pittsburgh. Ron Johnson, number 1 pick out of Michigan State, 1978 to 1984. Sam Washington, 1982 to 1985. Delton Hall, the Rookie of the Year over Rod Woodson in 1987 to 1989. They went cornerback 1 and 2 that year. DJ Johnson from 1989 to 1992. Dion Figures, another number 1 pick, 1993 to 1996. Willie Williams, 1993 to 1996, 2004 and 2005 as well. Chad Scott from 1997 to 2004. Dwayne Washington from 1998 to 2003. Bryant McFadden from 2005 to 2008, 2010 to 2011. William Gay from 2007 to 2011 and 2013 to 2017. Keenan Lewis, 2009 to 2012. Do I need to say Artie Burns? 2016 to 2019. I probably shouldn't. And Steven Nelson, 2019 to present. I left a couple names off of that list. Okay. Here are the guys that I believe are the front runners for this. Dwayne Woodruff, 1979 to 1990. 12 great seasons. Never went to a Pro Bowl. Now a judge.
Yep.
Ike Taylor, 2003 to 2014. If the guy had better hands, he would have been a perennial Pro Bowler. He just did not get the interceptions, but he got the pass breakups like crazy.
Yep.
And a guy that a lot of people forget about, had a great career here, 1998 to 2009, Deshae Townsend.
Absolutely.
So those are the 3 that I'm thinking are the front runners. Live chat, do you have anybody that you think should replace Dwayne Woodruff, Deshae Townsend, and Ike Taylor?
I loved Dwayne Woodruff. He's another one that he's in that Brian Hinkle / Keith Willis category. He played his entire career basically. Well, he was in Super Bowl 14, but he was a leader on that defense all throughout the 80s. He had 37 or 35 interceptions. He was a great player for them, and had he played at a different era, he probably would have been remembered more fondly. And of course, Ike. He didn't have his great hands in the regular season, but he had a big pick in Super Bowl 40 in the fourth quarter. He had a big pick in the AFC Championship game that year, and he had a big pick against Jacksonville in that almost comeback. So he was clutch anyway.
I've got a lot of people saying Dungy. Since Dungy was never a starter, I actually didn't put him on the list.
His career was too short here.
and it was a very short career here. So I really didn't have him in there. Some people are saying McFadden over Townsend, then Deshae's starting to get some love here too. There's some guys definitely getting a lot of guys getting love here. Dwayne Woodruff's getting a lot of love. Deshae Townsend. So somebody had Deshae as number one. Ike is definitely in. Ike's getting a lot of votes. So it looks like Deshae, Woodruff, and McFadden are probably the guys. And Donald Nolan's really voting for Willie Gay, and Willie Gay is tied all time with Rod Woodson for 5 pick sixes. So let's look at those 4. So McFadden's got a vote here. Woodruff and Ike with Gay. So it looks like
McFadden with maybe the most underrated big play in Steeler history when he broke up that second down pass while covering Reggie Wayne in the end zone after the Jerome Bettis fumble. People talk about Ben's tackle that after the fumble, but if Reggie Wayne catches that touchdown, it's like the worst loss in Steelers history.
So it looks like what I'm seeing here, it looks like it's Woodruff and Taylor and Willie Gay, who was not originally, I did not expect him. He was on the list, but Willie Gay is our guy for the reserve. So that's pretty good. Good job, guys. Thank you. I really thought it was going to be Deshae in there, and Deshae was tough. Deshae was really good, but Deshae did not get the votes.
He had one hell of a career here. A lot of big plays for them.
2 Super Bowl championships, and big reason why was because of him. But big play Willie Gay is getting all the love, and I love it because that was one of my guys. I used to love shouting out, "Big play Willie Gay!" So this is actually, we can do this rather quick. And there's a guy that I want to leave off because he's my least favorite Steeler of recent times and possibly all time. But I'm breaking this up into free safety and strong safety. So what we can do here, though, is we'll pick one free safety, one strong safety, and one more guy. Okay. Chris Hope, Sean Manahan is not on the list. And the reason Chris Hope is not on the list and the reason Thomas Everett are not on the list, they were Pro Bowlers for other teams. Chris Hope, right after he left here, was a Pro Bowler for the Tennessee Titans. Thomas Everett went to 1 Pro Bowl with the Dallas Cowboys. So since they ended up being Pro Bowlers, I did not put them on the list. And that's something we discussed last week. I would have probably put Chris Hope on the list, but he is officially a Pro Bowler, even though he did not do it in black and gold. So let's look at the free safeties first. Rick Woods from 1982 to 1986 had a lot of interceptions here in that time. He was a punt returner as well. Eric Williams from 1983 to 1986, he had a good bit of interceptions around that time. Brent Alexander, a very talented, but not a big name here in Pittsburgh, but in the early 2000s, 2000, 2003, he was very good for this team. Mike Mitchell, my least favorite Steeler of all time, 2014 and 2017. I thought he was dreadful, and I thought he had a mouth that didn't back up everything he was saying. And I know he could beat me up. I'm just not a Mike Mitchell fan. I wish him all the well. I wish him great things in life, but not a big fan. Then the guy that, bar none, I'm putting him on the list. I'm not even letting you vote for free safety. Darren Perry, 1992 to 1998. How he does not have one is crazy to me. So if anybody really thinks anybody could beat Darren Perry as a free safety, I would be shocked. A guy that's getting a lot of love out there, we didn't talk about yet, and we're going to talk about him in strong safety, is a guy that I love. He had a mouth, but he could back it up.
Right.
And it's Lee Flowers. Leathon Flowers, 1995 to 2002. Myron Bell, 1994 to 97 and 2000 and 2001. McKeesport Mike Logan, 2001 to 06. Tyrone Carter, 04 to 09. Will Davis, 2010 to 2015. Will Allen, 2010 to 2015. Sean Davis, 2016 to 2019. And Terrell Edmonds, 2018 to present. Look, Perry, I already said yes to Perry. Looks like Lee Flowers, paper champions. It's
remember the big war words he had with Warren Sapp in 2002, and when the Bucs went to the Super Bowl, he said, "Hey, what's up, Lee? How you doing?" at the Super Bowl. So they had a nice little war going on. It was a great little rivalry for a couple of years there.
Lee Flowers in a landslide for strong safety. Darren Perry in a landslide free safety. And who's our backup here? So let's look through. Yeah, Mike Logan does not have a Pro Bowl. And so Tyrone Carter, I didn't put Mundy on the list.
Yeah.
Ryan Mundy. Good job, Dallas Quinley. I don't know how I missed Ryan Mundy. So one of the few, I think he's the only one that I missed there. Mike Logan's getting a lot of love here.
McKeesport, Mike.
And everybody's agreeing with me. I mean, Ezra says it in all caps. I cannot stand Mike Mitchell. He was taunting Jacksonville before the game. In that 2017 AFC wildcard game. Mark Tobin says Mike Mitchell was a terrible, horrible waste of money. Both. Lee Flowers, it ain't close. I love that line. Looks like Logan. Looks like Logan is Mike Logan is your backup on this team. So I like it. Well, actually, wait. It might be Ryan Mundy. All right. Mike Logan just got another vote. So it looks like Jason Medley just broke the tie. It's Mike Logan. So we're going to go ahead and write Mike Logan down. There you go. We're coming up on the top of the hour. That was a fun show. George Teston says, I don't know if Glenn Edwards or JT Thomas were Pro Bowlers. They were, because George, they would have definitely been on this list.
Absolutely.
And they would have definitely been starters. I'd be like, guys, number 24 will be our cornerbacks. And they would have beaten out. It would have been JT and Ike Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
But JT has one. Glenn Edwards is another guy. He made a Pro Bowl. He deserved to make a Pro Bowl. He was one of those, I don't want to call him anonymous, but you have all these names from the 70s.
Right.
A.T. Thomas and Glenn Edwards were as large as life.
Especially those Glenn Edwards,
were huge for that defense. You can't have 11 Pro Bowlers, but you really could have.
Right.
That's how good that defense was back then. That's how great they were. Oh, wow. Guys, this was a fun show. Dallas Quinley does want to ask, hey, what do you think about Big Ben's passer rating in Madden? I guess it was bad. I just found it out now. I didn't know that. But, Dallas, I think with that, it's probably based on they're just looking at last year and they're not looking at this at what could be this year. They're taking that 6-quarter sample and there you go. I don't play Madden, and the only reason I don't play Madden is I'd be addicted and I get nothing else done. I do want to bring up Dave Shipley here. He says, love you, BTSC family. Good night. Hey, you took our line. We love you guys. Thank you so much for coming in. This is fun. It's always great to talk about the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that's what we do in the first show. But it's really nice to go back in time and talk about these guys, because one of the reasons we watch the Pittsburgh Steelers is we fall in love with these players. And the guys that we remember as kids, like the Keith Willises, like the John Banaszaks, like all these guys, Lee Flowers. I wasn't exactly a kid when Lee Flowers was playing, but we remember these guys and we love their commitment when they were in black and gold, and you never forget them. You never forget legends. And I think we put together a really good list. So thanks so much, Tony. I hope you had fun. Let's think of something awesome to do next week.
Absolutely. I had a blast, and thanks to everybody for helping us out. It was a really fun show.
All right, we've got a great team that we put together. I'll probably recap them on the website. But for Tony Defeo, my name is Bryan Anthony Davis, and once again, just when you think you've got all the answers, we keep changing the questions.